Welcome to the My Rules Are Better podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet. Today, really just a couple of topics, and I want to certainly give a shout out to a couple of folk. Connor Seitz Bowen, long-standing podcast listener, who's emailed me about this particular recording with regards to terrain. I'll talk a little bit about that, but it's not a primary topic. And also Ted Roy, who's a long-time participant in Model Rail Radio and also noted in last night's Model Rail Radio recording that he really likes what I'm doing with My Rules Are Better. And it's always good to get these, I don't know, just occasional prods indicating that you're moving things in the right direction with regards to recording podcasts. Connor mentioned that he thinks the nature of building terrain is no longer part of wargaming or has been reduced in wargaming. He provided a YouTube video. I watched maybe the first 5 minutes. I really wasn't into the YouTube video. I have a lot of, I don't even know what one would call it, I guess laser cut wood kit stuff that I've built in the past 3 years for the games at work. A wide variety of broken down buildings, country house, a bunch of fences, a whole lot of stuff that's come in wooden kit form that's required assembly, painting. You know, it's just taken time and effort and produced beautiful things that are perfectly utilizable in a variety of different games. And my perspective is that that whole thing hasn't slowed down. I mean, I don't know, the whole thing just struck me as really strange because it certainly doesn't resonate with my own experiences that people are no longer making terrain for war games. So, an interesting thought, Connor, but not one that I really shared. The lead pile, I don't know, I've taken out miniatures recently. I've reflected heavily on the nature of what lead rot is. I mentioned lead rot briefly when I met Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone, and I've done more research online, and what I consider lead rot is the miniatures turning into like little lumps of coal. They go black, in fact. And the lead rot that's described online, or at least a majority of the stuff online, appears to be lead oxide, which is white. So I'm wondering what the black coal-like miniatures I have are. What kind of crazy thing this thing is, if it's not standard textbook lead rot. But in parallel to this, it also notes that humidity is really the enemy of old lead miniatures. So I went and bought a bunch of these, I think they're called, I don't know what they call, kind of desiccation pouches or whatever that suck water out of foodstuffs and this kind of stuff, and started peppering that through my miniature boxes, the boxes that I store my miniatures in. And that's a great experience because it gives me an opportunity to actually open up the boxes and go through them and add these little, I don't know what we call them, packets, I guess, in at various levels. And it's actually really edifying going through the painted miniatures that I have. It's something that I find very cathartic and actually gives me a sense of the value, I guess, the intrinsic value that these things have. It also reminds me, each of these figures that I've sent off and had painted at one time or another has happened at some time in my life. And I don't know what happened to this, but I kept paper records for a period of time that had all the correspondence that I had with Fred Reed and others in printed out form. And that was one of the things that was lost in one of the many moves. So I don't really have a very good written history associated with a lot of these figures. They're more an emotional history that comes from them. Some of the top ones, the Kirill Kenevs, for example, are actually published. So they're part of books that Kirill has written about painting miniatures, which is wonderful to have. So I have those books to reference with the figures. But a majority of them are just a lot of Fred Reed painted figures. And now, I wouldn't say increasingly, but I don't know, maybe a fifth of my collection is recently painted stuff. Hopefully moving to probably about a third of my collection when I get all the recently painted stuff back. But just going through miniatures is a wonderful thing, and it's very cathartic. It also makes me reflect rather sadly that the intention of these things is to play with others. And in large part, a lot of that has not been done. For my birthday, which was a few weeks ago, I purchased a Tyranid army that I saw on eBay, kind of crazy bug-looking creatures, in part inspired by H.R. Giger, but really more Games Workshop's own, I don't know, creation in some regard. Anyway, this was a shooty Tyranid army. Most of the Tyranid armies are for close combat, getting in and doing a lot of savagery with claws and mouths and other things. But this is a shooty Tyranid army, which was a strange thing to have. Anyway, I've reflected that my miniature collecting hobby is so multi-layered but some of it is about capturing elements of time. I've been back in contact with Fred Reed recently. His name is Justin Reed. He doesn't paint miniatures anymore, but for a good number of years, he was my primary miniature painter, certainly when I was in the UK. And he's building an orc syringe for me, which I think will take months to make. He makes these elaborate costumes now. That's very much what he does. He builds costumes for people. And it makes me reflect, actually, a lot of the miniature painters that I knew in the UK, and some of whom I have commissioned works from, ended up working in costuming, either for the BBC, Doctor Who, these kind of things following. But it's just wonderful being in contact with Fred again, because, we had somewhat of a friendship for a period of time. In addition, I've been reflecting on game stores. And I've been reflecting on game stores primarily because I've been traveling to Southern California and will continue to travel to Southern California for some time now. One of the game stores I really wanted to see, a game store called Aero Hobbies and Games, which in its prime, well, maybe 3-4 years ago, was featured in a video with the Game of Thrones star Maisie Williams, where she pretends to be a regular employee of the game store and, selling Game of Thrones related role-playing stuff or miniatures or what have you. So the thing that caught me about this video was that there were a large number of miniature cases that were in this game store. And I thought, wow, that's going to be a game store that I want to check out if I'm ever in Southern California and have a bit of time on my hands. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Southern California with a bit of time on my hands, and I went by Aero Hobbies and Games. It's in Santa Monica, and it's going out of business. So I walked into this thing, and it was very similar, actually, to my experience with some of the game stores in the UK. It looked like it had been robbed, but this was very clearly like it was being robbed for an end purpose. But all the miniature cases, and there were a number of miniature cases, I tried to estimate for my wife how many thousands of miniatures were on display. I was in the kind of 5,000 to 7,000 range just on sheer volume, but I probably got it wrong. There was a huge number of miniatures, historical miniatures, a lot of old Warhammer 40,000, a lot of old Warhammer Fantasy, just in cases, just amazing stuff. I mean, the painting quality, wasn't really there, but you knew that there was just a lot of interesting lead that was there. And I found some Citadel journals, and I found a couple of Wargames Illustrated, older magazines. I brought these up to the counter and asked the fellow if any of these miniatures were for sale. He said, we have an Instagram account. I've not been able to track down the Instagram account. The store doesn't have an Instagram account. He personally doesn't have an Instagram account. It's really strange when people tell you these things and you can't actually map that onto anything. Anyway, no ability to access anything that was for sale. I said, that's an interesting Hobbit army, pointed down. He pulled it out, and it was about 100 of the early Games Workshop Hobbits. That was the main force. A fellow with a standard with, I think it was called Eggs and Bacon or something, on the standard. And he said this was painted by someone who's no longer with us. And I thought to myself, this is so interesting, this game store that has so much history but is now soon to be no longer with us. And I've read a lot of the stuff online. You can look up this game store online. And the fellow just basically said they'd have to move because the place they were in was getting bulldozed down. And for whatever reason, he just didn't move the store. Instead, I think he's packing up his miniatures and taking them away. But I had this thought, I saw something of myself in the sky surrounded by his miniatures, which was really very profound. And also the whole interaction where, I'd gone there, I actually literally took a case down to buy some miniatures at this place, buy some painted miniatures. And having had that experience with him and having had a sense of the loss that this game store closing would have for this community, I was just a little bit in shock, actually. We had quite a bit of driving to do after this, and I had a long conversation with my wife associated with all the elements of going into this game store and seeing it. As you look on its Facebook page, it's, tens of happy kids playing games in the evening and adults, and this is just like an epicenter of joy. No more. And also, you could see the psychology of the owner, both in the video interviews, there's a bunch of interviews of him online, all the, text interviews and stuff. And I just thought, what is this thing? What's happening to this thing that these game stores that are, epicenters are going out of business? And part of it is fighting the good fight. I mean, part of it is, you've obviously got the online thing, but part of it is actually maintaining game stores. And chronologically, I think my birthday happened first. So chronologically, I hit up maybe 3-4 local game stores here. And I've talked very highly about the game stores in this area, but none of them actually covered anything that interests me. They're all very big on, the New Games Workshop stuff and a lot of, Star Wars and things like that. It's all very cute. And Game of Thrones, funnily enough. So, all stuff that doesn't really interest me. Lots of plastic. Lots and lots of plastic. So, these epicenters, and they're busy, without question. They've got a lot of people playing a lot of stuff, but none of it really interests me. And the one game store in Mountain View, Game Castle in Mountain View, that had a really small historical section, of which I made numerous purchases in historically, that's no longer has historical. It has a very small, in fact, it has basically exactly the same box sets of historical that I looked at previously and wasn't interested in, but an ever diminishing number. And the other Game Castle, which I think is in perhaps Fremont or Union City, that used to have a wide range of interesting historical stuff as well. And I think I bought that when I was last there, maybe 18, 19 months ago. So I'm starting to wonder what this thing is, whether it's just something which is monastic in nature. It's just something that, these stores are no longer going to be there. So it's for those of us kind of collecting and piecing and going on eBay and all this kind of stuff. I mean, is that where this thing lies now? In parallel to this, for my birthday, I bought a bunch of Osprey books. And I think wargaming and Osprey books go pretty heavily hand in hand. But I've just been flicking through them. I bought one which relates to the death of Hitler and debunking the, Hitler in Argentina side of the new history of the Second World War. I find the new history of the Second World War really fascinating. In particular, the rewriting of Nazi Germany as being slightly better now. More stuff has come in the fall of the Soviet Union. There's very curious juxtapositions now in histories being written about that period. Anyway, not necessarily a historical podcast. So what do we do without these game stores? Well, what do we do with the game stores that are still there? I don't know. But there's still Brookhurst Hobbies in the area of LA that I'm going to be spending some time in. And Brookhurst I've been to once. I didn't get to this trip, actually. I was absolutely exhausted for the one day that I had off, which is a theme for a long funk coming up as well. So I didn't get to Brookhurst. But I think certainly Brookhurst will be the epicenter of my time in LA as I spend more and more time in LA, because I think I certainly liked what they were doing. Ironically, Brookhurst is right by Heron Stone, I used to record 7-8 years worth of podcast recordings with Heron Stone. He lives very close by Brookhurst. But I'm probably more inclined to go to Brookhurst than I am to meet up with Heron Stone. So, a footnote for those that remember Stone Ape at least. So, yes, these are just my thoughts on a Sunday morning. And there'll be more recordings coming up. I need to set up cameras and do things. Part of this travel, which is ongoing, is that when I have weekends at home, they're usually recovery, do washing, clean clothes, kind of get ready for the next round of escape kind of things. And my workaday life in the evenings, weekdays, there's not a lot of time to do kind of planning and design and other things, and the light levels aren't great. So my plan is to break out the Orcs versus Humans. I don't know, probably it'll happen at least once or if not twice in November, but I am doing quite a bit of travel in between. And hopefully I'll have a review of Brookhurst Hobbies coming shortly.